Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first Education Committee meeting of the school year. Another year has passed, the last one of this term, or the last couple of months of this term for the board. I am going to be chairing the meeting tonight on behalf of Chair Tanya Berzovich, and I'll call the meeting to order and welcome with great respect and humility. We acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound and unique and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. And I will also call for any additions to the agenda at this time. Okay, seeing no additions. Any deletions from the agenda? I haven't been given any in advance. Okay, no deletions. There is going to be one change of order. We're going to make 8.2 is going to become 8.1, and 8.1 is going to become 8.2. We're just switching those two around. And if there's no objections, then we'll assume we have approval of the agenda. Okay, seeing no objections, and any objections to approving the minutes? I have to say it's very weird staring at the screen and the boxes. It's just not the same as being in person. Okay, I see no objection to approval of the minutes. So let's move straight into presentations. And the first presentation is going to be from Deputy Superintendent Laura Tate. It's so excellent to be able to introduce you as our Deputy Superintendent. Yay, Laura! Welcome, Deputy Superintendent.
Oh, what a welcome. Thank you so much, Chair. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited, and I feel like I know about 2% of the role right now, so I'm excited. But presenting about the summer program is kind of old hat, so I can do that well. And I will say the summer program, acknowledge the board actually for your support for the summer programs. We're very grateful for the ability to be able to provide the service to our students and our families. So I'm going to share my screen for you here. So we had approximately 75 elementary families access our summer outreach program this year, and 40 secondary students. The 74 families from elementary, there were about 58 of those, from those families, 58 students accessed the program directly. So I want to draw attention to that because it does outline and point out that families, the adults, the parents, were accessing support through our outreach services, which is fantastic. We had all sorts of students referred from all sorts of schools. There was quite the variety. And the focus for the program, as you're probably well aware, but I'll take just a moment to give you a high level, that for certain, the focus was on relationship building, relationship with these children, with these families, but also relationship with the system, with school for these children, these families, to have just a step closer, building trust in what they know to be school. In addition, it gave an opportunity for the children and families to socialize, to build on these socialization skills, to get outside, play outside, be outdoors, and to have some fun. There was lots of positive feedback. As I said, the connections with the adults, the parents of these children is a definite highlight. There are some testimonials for you in the PowerPoint here. Fairview, the elementary program took place out at Fairview Elementary, and the secondary program took place out of Woodlands. Our manager for mental health and addictions, Lynn Brown, big gratitude, big thank you, oversaw the elementary program, and Lynn and her team, and then Brett Hancock, our district principal of Learning Alternatives, and his team for overseeing the secondary programs. A big thank you to them, gratitude to them, because this is all their work. And we saw lots of students and families from Fairview primarily, and Bayview, you'll see on the graph there, with also students featuring in the pie from McGurr and from Brecken as well. Drop-ins, so there were formal connections, but also drop-ins. And of course, because the program at the elementary level for sure was held at Fairview, there were lots of Fairview students that dropped in. And with regards to numbers and contacts of the referrals, so of all the referrals made last year, 59% of those referrals materialized into actual contact with our outreach program. This year we saw an increase to 76% of the families referred. There were actual contacts made with those families. So high level update for you around the summer program. I know that we have a couple of videos, and I believe that our Director of Communications is going to pop on the screen and play those videos for us. If that's not correct, Dale, just let me know and I'll bring it to a close.
Standing in a crowded room and I can't see your face. Put your arms around me, tell me everything's okay. In my mind, I'm running around a cold and empty space. Just put your arms around me, tell me everything's okay. Break my bones, but you won't see me fall. Oh, oh. The rising tide will rise against them all. Oh, darling, hold my hand. Oh, won't you hold my hand? 'Cause I don't wanna walk on my own anymore. Won't you understand? 'Cause I don't wanna walk alone. I'm ready for this. There's no denying. I'm ready for this. You stop me falling. I'm ready for this. I need you holding. I'm ready for this. So darling, hold my hand. Soul is like a melting pot when you're not next to me. Tell me that you got me and you're never gonna leave. Trying to find a moment where I can find relief. Please tell me that you got me and you're never gonna leave. Break my bones, but you won't see me fall. Oh, the rising tide will rise against them all. Oh, darling, hold my hand. Oh, won't you hold my hand? 'Cause I don't wanna walk on my own anymore. Won't you understand? 'Cause I don't wanna walk alone. I'm ready for this. There's no denying. I'm ready for this. You stop me falling. I'm ready for this. I need you holding. I'm ready for this. So darling, hold my hand. Don't wanna know that feeling when I'm all alone. So please don't make me wait, 'cause I don't wanna break. No, I don't wanna fall. When you're next to me, content, I'm not afraid to be. You don't make me wait, and never let me break. You never let me fall. Darling, hold my hand. 'Cause I don't wanna walk on my own anymore. Won't you understand? 'Cause I don't wanna walk alone. I'm ready for this. There's no denying. I'm ready for this. You stop me falling. I'm ready for this. I need you holding. I'm ready for this. So darling, won't you hold my hand?
Thanks for that, Dale. Your department always does such wonderful work, making everything look so Fabulous. Laura, I see we have one question. Do you want to do that now, or do we want to wait until after the next video? What's best for you?
Why don't we do the videos and then we can open it up.
Okay. Dale, how's it going loading up that next video?
Or we can take the question now.
Oh, he's ready. There we go. Let's hit it, Dale. Thank you.
If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'll sail the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, ooh, yeah. If you're tossing and you're turning and you just can't fall asleep, I'll sing a song beside you. And if you ever forget how much you really mean to me, every day I will remind you. Oh, find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, and you'll be there. Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You'll always have my shoulder when you cry. I'll never let go, never say goodbye. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3, I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you like 4, 3, 2, 2, and you'll be there. Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, ooh, you can count on me cause I can count on you.
Thanks, Dale. Okay, I see that Trustee Stanley has a question, so we'll start with Trustee Stanley and then go down the speaker's list if there's more questions.
Hi, thank you. Wow, that looked fun. It's almost more fun than I had this summer. So my question is in kind of thinking about that idea that, you know, oftentimes the most vulnerable children are the hardest to reach. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how schools refer and if there's any barriers or you know, challenges getting at those the children, reaching the children who might need the most help.
Thank you. So referrals are made directly to our outreach program, and our And Lynn Brown, of course, stays closely connected. So schools are going to check in with families, give them information about the summer program. They're going to let the summer program know that those conversations and those referrals have been made, and then we wait and see. And sometimes we reach out and we see what kind of connection or openness we have from some of those referred families. And it really is done very simply, kind of old-fashioned and reaching out sort of from human to human. I think the biggest barrier is going to be, I mean, right now it's, you know, it's one location and you can see where the majority of the families are coming from. They're coming from that central area. So of course we're, you know, when you look at the drop-ins, for example, most of the drop-ins came from the student body of that catchment area school, Fairview. So for certain, that definitely will be a barrier. The other barriers we look at or consider, I think we've been looking at them all throughout COVID. But I would say, you know, where we've had maybe adult members of the family really wrestling with their own mental health and well-being, and whether they're able to make those connections or get their kids interested. If they're not in the catchment area and the kids can't just wander over, they are going to be reliant on an adult. And so we certainly have, you know, busing and different forms of transportation, child development support workers, et cetera, to reach out, but certainly that'll be a barrier. I know it sort of feels like it's just distance, but it's a little bit more than that. It's not, they can't casually just wander over because we only have this in one location currently.
Do you have a follow-up, Jessica?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't see anyone. Oh, I see Greg, and then I'll put myself on the list after Greg. Go ahead, Trustee Keller.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Wow, great presentation. It's nice to see everyone back again in school. First day today. My question is, you know, the support that we provided to the students over the summer, how do we transition that back into the new school year and making sure that we're providing support to the students who really need it most?
If we think about this maybe in a cyclical nature, the majority of those families who attended or connected to the summer outreach program were referred by their home schools. And that referral process will then return itself again and it'll come back to the school. So the schools will know which families and children access the programs. We've also, as you're well aware, we've combined our inclusion support team with our outreach team. And so those groups, those expertise, they're all working together to support our schools in a more fulsome way. You know, high level example is a family where the parental unit wasn't necessarily having a whole bunch of contact with the outside world, and therefore their children didn't go to school. They actually connected with the summer outreach program this year and started back to school after having not attended school for a year. And so the connections and communication between the outreach programs with our inclusion outreach and the home school are super important and are very robust. So those kids were likely already on the radar before they got referred for the summer outreach program.
You have a follow-up, Greg?
Maybe just a quick comment. So thank you for that, Ms. Tate. I think, as I understand it, one of the objectives of the program is to try and reconnect students with the schools, and I'm glad to hear that we're starting to see some of that. And I'm hoping that as we continue to do this, we'll see more and more. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I don't see other folks, so I'll just pop my question in, and that is actually in reference to, we ran the program last year, then we had the school year, then we're running it again this year. And I'm wondering, in reference to running it last year, have you heard from principals the impact that it had throughout the school year on students? I know you just talked about some kids coming back, which is excellent. You know, it's like, got to start there. But, you know, in terms of, I heard you refer at the beginning to the relationships with people, but also relationships with the system. And so what is the feedback that we're hearing from the principals or the staff of those schools where students who participated in the outreach program went back, and what was their feedback on it?
That's a great question. It is a question I don't actually have a great answer for. So I do love that question though, and I think it's great data for us to gather. But at the moment, I can't really answer that in a great way. My apologies.
No problem. I look forward to it in the
We know.
future. Yeah, to be continued. Okay, I don't see any other questions, folks. Anybody else have questions for Deputy Superintendent Tate? No?
Every time we get together,
I'm going to try to say it every time I can tonight, Laura, every time I can. All right, no further questions. You are off the hook easily tonight. And we are going to move to 8.2, which is the old 8.1, and that brings us to our superintendent, Scott Saywell. We look forward to hearing from you on the Framework for Enhancing Student Learning report. Hello, Scott. Nice to see you.
Hi, Stephanie. Nice to see you as well. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a great summer. Yeah, thank you. So if you look on page 8 of your agenda, you will see what is called the Enhancing Student Learning report. I'm going to back up a little bit. 4 years ago, when this board developed the strategic plan, it wasn't contemplated that we would be doing an Enhancing Student Learning report. So for the last 4 years, what we've done is something called the District Review Story, which is the plan that we've developed, staff, to review how we've progressed on the strategic plan, the goals and the objectives there within. So last year, the ministry required that we report on 9 data sets. So in a ministerial order, it describes these data sets, and in your package, you have those data sets on page 13, I believe. Yeah, so on page 13, it describes the measures that are outlined in the ministerial order called the Enhancing Student Learning Order. Last year, we did our best to put those 2 elements together. So what we typically did in our district review story, we tried to add these elements of the Enhancing Student Learning report. It was a lengthy document in the ministry's eyes anyway. They like us to keep this report to 10 pages. It was, I believe, 16 pages, and it really didn't do justice to analyzing the data sets that are required by the ministry in their ministerial order. So this year, we did 2 documents. So earlier in the year, we presented the district review story, and that is really about our strategic plan. And so again, delivering on our progress on the strategic plan. And we separated the 2 because this document, the Enhancing Student Learning report, is really delivering on those elements that the ministry wants to see in a report. So that is the report you have before you tonight. Last year, the ministry did respond to our sort of first take on this with something called the peer review feedback, and you can find that on page 23. Kind of in a nutshell, what the ministry would have wanted us to do last year is just develop a little further analysis on those data sets, again, required by the ministry. So I think we've done a better job this year in the analysis section. So on page 14, the report starts with all of the data. You can see on page 14, the first section is the intellectual development section, and the first outcome is the 3-year trend for grades 4 and 7 on the FSA on track or extending in literacy expectations. I'm not going to go through each one of these. I've learned something over the last 4 years that we share the report with the board, and we don't need to go through it so much. But the design is as you see it on page 14 on the first outcome, except for one page that I want to point out. And then after each one of those sections, we have an analysis and adjustments and adaptations. So things that we're doing in the school district to improve on those results. Now, the one page I did want to make mention of because it's a little bit different than the others. Because every single section is broken down into subpopulations. So, so you can see on the page on the screen, you can see all students, Indigenous students all, off reserve, on reserve, students with disabilities or diverse abilities, and children and youth in care. So all of the data sets are broken down into those subpopulations, except one, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. On page 19, you'll see that we haven't broken those down because the ministry in their document does not break them down for us. So we don't have that information to share with you because simply it's not available, and we've never shared that information in that way. So that's just the one difference with all of the data. I think that's all I would say, and maybe open it up for trustees for questions. I have the Learning Services Department with us this evening who will help answer some of the questions about some of the data presented and or the analysis, the things we're doing in the district to improve our outcomes, and there they are in the war room.
Thank you, Superintendent. Can I just ask a clarifying question about the way the data is presented?
Yeah.
Before we move into questions. So if we go to, for instance, page 14, we see the little, and we go to grade 4, we see the little gray boxes on the top. So all students would be the number of students when all the students are compiled into one who are on track or extending. 65% of students are on track or extending, and then below are the subpopulations asked for by the ministry.
Yeah, thank you for that. I probably should have explained that a little better. You're exactly right. So we do all students in that little sort of light black line on the top in those years. So 1920, 2021, 21, 22. So 2019-20, 65%. And that represents 535 students. That's 65%. And so on in 2021, 74%, and 2021, 2022, 65%.
And then can I ask one more clarifying question on the presentation of the data? The numbers, so you'll see, 82% and 18 underneath. Is that the number of students that wrote? The actual hard number? Okay, thank you. Just making sure that I...
Yeah, that represents the 82%. So in each one it says the number of students and essentially the representing percentage. So 18 students represents 82%.
Of the students who wrote, though, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, thank you. And I see the questions have begun. I think I see Trustee Stanley first and then Trustee Keller.
I seem to be having trouble getting my camera on, so you can hear me. Oh, there's the camera. Hi. I have a straightforward question. I did say question, so feel free to throw me back on that list. On page 15, when we're looking at the bar graph for grade 4 students, I believe we're looking at current and 3-year trends for the number of percentage of students in grade 4 and 7 on track for numeracy expectations. I'm wondering what, I'm trying to understand the bar graph. So on that, we have some that, and let's look at the very first section that's, 2019 to 2020. We have some that have numbers, but they all are not available in the percentages. So what I was trying to understand was, what does the bar graph represent in this situation? Because in that very first section, the numbers are different. Like if we look at all Indigenous students versus students with diverse abilities, Indigenous students are, approximately, well, they're double compared to the other category, but yet the bar graph's at the same level and they're both at not available from a percentage. So I'm trying to say, hey, what does the bar graph, the physical aspect of the graph, communicate to us?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Jessica, which one are you looking at exactly? The bar graphs, the greater the percentage, the bar graph should be larger. Now, this is draft, and I didn't catch this sort of glitch on the one you're pointing out. I can see the some of the numbers are hidden because the numbers of students who wrote were too low, and it could possibly identify them.
Yeah. So so what I'm wondering is that we appear, so page 15, looking at grade 4 students.
Yeah.
First group to the left of
Yeah.
2019, 2020. And I'm just trying to figure out, because I see that we have numbers of students, but we don't have percentages. So what I don't know is that what the bar graph represents. So if the bar graph goes up, it's not making sense for me what that says. So does that mean that it's a communication about the percentage, or it's a communication about the number, or in this situation, since it appeared to me across the board to reflect percentages, which is why I'm wondering why, like in that section and in other areas where we have not, or NA, why it's raised. So I was curious about if I was misunderstanding something, or that just might not be a good representation.
Why does this one have that?
Yeah. No, that is a 5%.
I could, I don't know if
Bigger and
my
put it
team,
in.
I could bring up the, yeah, I see what you're saying. And if I could quickly bring up the ministry data on this, because I can't tell by that either, by the way. So if I can bring up the data, so measure 2.1.
There you go. I think
See.
if we may, I think there's a possibility, as Trustee Stanley has pointed out, it's a possibility that we may have just the data may not be accurate, because there shouldn't be a number if they don't have a percentage. So it's possible that grade 4 numeracy 1 on those 2 years in particular, the data has been entered incorrectly into our graph. I think if you look at like the next group, grade 7 and grade 10, the percentages and numbers are there. So I think we just need to take a harder look at that for the final report, the final version of this for that grade 4 data.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the actual data. And of course, you can't have one that is NA but shows a percentage. So when you see that NA percentage 47, that is a glitch. And I can tell you that for that, the data is not available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was what I was
Nice
assuming,
catch.
and sorry to point that out, but important to get it right. So the bar graphs are intended to represent the percentages then.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Stanley. I will put you back on the list. And I see Trustee Keller is next.
Thank you. I'm hoping this is a question that can be answered. So it's great to see that our graduation and completion rates are on the rise, especially over the last few years here. We have the district review story that tells us a number of things, and now we have this as well. And I'm curious to know if there's any sort of, from a big picture perspective, any sort of causal relationship or cause and effect between what we're seeing in terms of actions that we're taking to support students and the actual outcomes as seen by some of these measures. And again, I'm not sure we can answer this on the spot here, but I'm curious to know, given that we're being required to measure these specific measures on an annual basis, how can we use this information, this requirement of things data that we're collecting and analyzing to try and build relationships to the actual actions that we're taking at the class level or the district level to student outcomes?
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll ever see a one-to-one causal effect. I do know that our focus schools are showing improvements, and Laura could probably talk to that, and or Jackie. But those are we'd have to be specific about something we're doing in a classroom, Greg, to appreciate what that effect would be in grad rates, in a grade 4 class years from now. But as we've shared in the past, we have these markers that are the FSA, and I'll say it again, we're a little bit challenged because we've said it many times, around our participation rates in the FSA. So how much we can use those to dictate what our next step is really difficult with those results, because they're so poorly subscribed to, frankly. So, but we have certain markers, and grade 4-7 FSAs, grade 10 English as an example, and then graduation. Grade 10 science seems to be a problem for Indigenous students, and I know Ricky and her department are looking at that as well. So we do have some indicators of success, but FSA is a bit of a challenge for us, how we use that information. Our preference is to use what we've built locally, and that's good formative assessment for classroom teachers to use. I'm sorry, I don't know if the learning team has anything to add to that.
Thank you, through the chair. When we think about, say, for example, the summer outreach program, the summer outreach program itself has goals. So they're trying to make connections with families. Can we find a direct correlation between that and completion or graduation rates? No. But how we report to the board and how we report to the ministry are that sort of satellite data. But when we're looking at the summer outreach program, or looking at the teaching of reading in grade 1, we're looking at that street level data. And we know that if children are better prepared in grade 1, they'll be more successful in grade 2, and then grade 3, and then grade 4. If we can connect children who hadn't been connecting to school at all through the summer outreach program, and now they're connected to school, now they're going to school, chances are there's a better chance they're going to graduate. Is there a direct correlation? No, but there's lots of indirect that build toward that sort of more of that satellite data.
Okay, Greg, do you have a follow-up?
No, but thank you very much. I know this is not something that question that can be easily answered. I just know that it is a challenge. We do so much for our students, trying to support them through their journey, and we're always trying to find new and improved ways of measuring that success. So just trying to tie two apples and oranges together, perhaps. But anyways, thank you.
Thanks. I see Trustee Bailey with a question, and then I have myself on the list.
Sorry. Yeah, so my question is on page, what page was it? Just a second. Page 11, I think it is. No, it's not. It's 17, I think. It's the section on analysis, adjustments, and adaptations. I was really happy, not happy, but I mean, good to see the acknowledgement, or, from the data of the challenges of, the transitioning from grade to grade, particularly grade when you get to the graduation program. One of the things that I read, and I noticed that it said establish structures in each secondary schools that remove common barriers into earning credits in grade 10, including bridging opportunities from semester to semester to allow students extended time to complete courses. So I'm just wondering, I had a couple of thoughts and one concern around that. I was wondering how we're envisioning this to happen. Because I think teachers can only carry X amount of students in a semester. So how would a student who was getting extended time to complete the courses moving into another semester, how would we actually be able to properly evaluate those students in knowing that they have completed the course and met the learning outcomes? That's my one. I have two questions. That was my first one.
Dawn, perhaps you
Yeah.
answer that?
Yeah, happy to. And I think the main approach there, and I hear Trustee Bailey when you're saying, you know, it's hard for a teacher who has a full workload to take on additional students beyond, you know, the scope of their work, whether it's a semester or a full year. But the conversation is starting around the students. So we're acknowledging that some students, as they enter the graduation program in grade 10, if we don't change the structure for the student, 5 months of a semester course is not going to be enough time for them to be successful and earn credits. So the idea is to plan, to be thoughtful and intentional in how the school is going to support the student, working within the confines of the collective agreement around teacher workload and stuff. But the idea is, if a student, you know, the team of teachers and the administrators and support staff around that student build a plan that says this student may take from September to spring break, or might need September for the entire year to successfully earn those credits. As Superintendent Sable said, Science 10 is one of the courses that initially at the beginning of the graduation program is often a barrier for student success. Build a plan for that student so that the student knows, hey, I'm starting this course, and when January 28th, the end of the semester rolls around, I'm not done. It's not all or nothing. I've earned the credits or not. It's a hopefully I've got supports to be successful, but if not, the school structurally is putting supports in place to be able to say, we've got you if you need to extend an extra week, an extra 2 weeks, maybe right through. And I think that is the approach that schools are exploring, because they know when we say, what are the barriers to graduation? One of the first things they say is, we limit the amount of time that students have to successfully earn credits, and we need to do better for some students in our structures. So hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of a start.
And through the chair, if I may add to that comment, is if we step even further back in this picture, this is just one example of the work we're trying to grow, the knowledge understanding we're trying to grow around personalizing children's experiences in school, and not, for example, look at the situation as having the student ready or prepared for the system, but actually getting the system prepared for the student, and almost flipping this narrative so that we can look at and explore creative outside the box sorts of ideas to insist that these students are successful.
Thanks. Trustee Beal, I heard you say you had a second question, but do you have a follow-up to this one? Because I'll put you on the list for second speakers if you have a.
Well, yeah, my follow-up is sort of, yeah. Okay, so saying that, and working in the post-secondary field now, I really like the idea. I'm just going to emphasize that the focus on grade 8 and 9. I think it's really crucial. But saying what you're suggesting, I'm just wondering how that translates into a student when they graduate. How prepared are they for post-secondary education if we've made extensions that, as you have suggested, Dawn, could go, you know, maybe throughout the whole year? Keeping in mind, I understand the barrier to social science 10 has been a nemesis for a long time, but how does that translate to our students being prepared? Because that's part of our job too, is to prepare our students to be able to go out into the world and navigate it successfully. So with confidence. And so I'm wondering, how does that translate to when they graduate, if we're offering extensions on courses like that?
Our first response was, we need to change the world and change post-secondary as well. One of the things, and all kidding aside, I think one of the things that the more students we're able to support as they enter the graduation program in grade 10, you know, a student who might take an extra 2 or 3, 4 weeks to get through Science 10, for example, when they get to grade 12, they may complete all of their courses on time. We just know that often our students they transition from grade 9 to grade 10. They're not fully ready to engage in earning credits, 32 credits a year to get to graduation. So the trend, it's that, will they be ready to leave grade 12 and enter post-secondary and meet the requirements of post-secondary learning? Hopefully. Many students, when they leave high school, often look at post-secondary as, I'm going to take 3 years to do a 2-year program because I'm going to work and I'm going to chip away at courses and do 2 courses a semester instead of 4 or 5. So there's a lot more flexibility for adult learners as they go into their post-secondary journey than secondary. We don't ask students and families when they're in grade 9 heading into grade 10, hey, do you want to take 4 years to complete the graduation program, right? The system is built to say, let's get through in 3 years. And we know that when we look at our graduation rates, when we ask, why are some of these students not making it? It goes back to the beginning of grade 10 and the first opportunity to earn credits. And we have some barriers, some time constraint barriers around them not being able to make that hurdle.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, they do have deadlines though in courses at university, and it's something that I'm seeing at the university level. So that's why I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were. Thanks very much for your answer.
Yeah, if I could, Chair, I just want to add my thoughts on that. And thanks for the response, Dawn. And great question, Naomi, because I hear those challenges as well. And I would just suggest that I think, the students who need us most, there are times in their educational career where they need a little more time or a little more help from us. I hope we're preparing students for post-secondary by the time they get to grade 12. And your concern is real. I appreciate it. And we don't want students going up there thinking that they can, take longer in a course when it's over, or have extensions, or get special privileges. But I think that's what we have to build in them while they're in the K-12 system, so they are prepared for when they get there. The alternative is they don't get there.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Thanks. So I've got myself next on the list, and it's in reference to, the comment on page 14, given the low participation rates, difficult to make reliable conclusions. Superintendent Saywell, you talked about having good formative assessment for classroom teachers. And I think one of the things that's really, something that we have to be proud of here in NLPS is our, locally produced reading assessments. I think they're fabulous. But we also like the difference between a good formative assessment for classroom teacher use and being able to look from a systems perspective at how we're serving our students' needs. Let's, for instance, say, how are our students in grade 4 doing when it comes to literacy are different. And so what do we do, and how do we know? When I look at this data that's provided on page 14, in every year except for 2021, 22, there's very little useful information there from a system perspective. And I do remember a number of years ago when our literacy rates were low. They were very low, and we put together system-wide programs, targeted system-wide literacy programs. Daily 5, I remember I could walk into every school and this was happening because we needed to lift those rates. So if we don't have access to that information at a system-wide level, how do we, what is it that we use, us helping you to, to implement them, to know when we need to have system-wide intervention?
Yeah, thanks. And maybe Jackie will jump in a little bit around the NLPS screener and how it's used. I'll just maybe say this, Stephanie, you're exactly right. We've had this conversation before. It is our ongoing challenge. The ministry has presented us with the best suite of data to determine whether this district is doing well for students and improving. So, we can look over the last 3 years if we're improving, and then as we do with the Learning Services Department, we talk about why we're not and what we can do differently. But it's based, unfortunately, largely on some data, FSA specifically. I mean, this whole document is really about FSA and the new assessments, the grade 10 assessments, which are requirement met. And those, you know, we're not sure how students are, if they're not engaged in those in the way that we can use that data meaningfully either. And so it is our ongoing challenge. The FSA was built by teachers for teachers, and I hope we see the day where that we understand that this data is important to system improvement, and that all of us ask parents and students to do their very best on this, because it gives us good information district-wide to allocate resources, to share good teaching practice. It could be really valuable data. I don't know, team, if there's something you wanted to share as well.
No, I think that was
really good.
Yep. Well said.
Thank you. So I'm just going to elucidate from that a little bit, that what I'm hearing is we really don't have reliable system-wide data at this point. We're working on it. And it's unfortunate because it means that we, as a system, when we're looking at where do we need to put our resources from a systems perspective, it's very hard for us to target certain areas without an understanding. So it's sort of, we're kind of caught right now, and our hope is either somehow the district assessment makes its way up to the district level, the locally produced one. But I mean, I think that, you know, when you get an assessment that becomes, you know, tries to do too many things, it's not valuable anymore. And that assessment is really valuable to the classroom teacher, where it's really important, the locally produced one. So the importance of having system-wide data helps us understand, you know, one, how we're doing in comparison to other systems, and two, where in our system we might need to target resources. But at this point, it's still a struggle for us, which is too bad, because when I look at these numbers, you know, we might make assumptions about our system based on the numbers that are here. We might make assumptions about where we should be targeting things based on the numbers that we have, but it turns out that they're not very reliable numbers. And so it's frustrating as someone who's in a position of, you know, oversight of the system, to lack the tools that are necessary to know that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that we're able to help align the very limited resources we have to move around in places that they'll make the most impact. So hopefully that's something that we continue to work on. All right, I'll move on to Trustee Stanley. You had a second question.
I do. I'm going to take some liberties and say, because it's on this topic, I wish that this document had the percentage of, or well, participation rates relative to actual numbers of students in the schools. Just, there's a comment that poor participation played a role, but I think anytime you have data and it's highly questionable because of lack of participation, throwing the numbers on there is super important, because I actually took me a while to realize that. So I think we should put that front and center about the participation rates. And then later on, we have the comment that it makes it difficult to interpret this data. That's not my question. My question is on a different section, and that section is looking at the human and social development data, page 19. And so what I think is great about this report is it gives us information that's intended to be a general overview. And I know the report gets sent off to the province, but from our perspective, I think that we trustees should be looking at this report and starting to ask why and what, you know, so here's the data. This is what it means. Why do we think that is? And what are you doing? I feel like the report had a lot of what are we doing? I want to ask why. And particularly when I look at this section on page 19, and I look at questions like about belongingness, you know, generalizing the numbers, except for grade 7, it bumps up a bit, but let's say that we have approximately, you know, 50%, maybe a bit more, but, you know, only 50% of our students feel like they belong in a school, or let's say 60% belong in a school, which means 40% feel that they don't, or at least that's how they're responding to this question. Same with the question about feeling unwelcome you know, let's generalize and say approximately 1/3 of our students are telling us that they feel unwelcome in our schools. And I really think it's important for us to say, why do you think that is? Or at least can we wonder together why we're getting these kinds of responses? And I see what you've done, but I kind of want to understand it a bit. And that's why I want to ask why, so we can contemplate, you know, what we think we need to do type thing. So why do you think those numbers are the way they are on this section?
Thank you. First thing I'll say, and the question about participation rates. So we have a link in the document that links you to the participation rates. And so we really stuck with what the ministry really designed for us to report on, and we didn't put in anything else. So you can do provincial comparisons, so we have links for those sorts of things, but again, just what they were asking for. And so that's why we've done that. We in Learning Services have all kinds of conversations about what we think is happening on these questions, and some of it is in a way, the question itself. And I spoke about, the one I'm going to bring up now. I spoke to this before. A good example is the question about, are there 2 or more adults that care about you? And just the way that question is asked and the way they share what is a positive response and what is a negative response. So as an example, on that question in grade 7, how many adults care about you? Between 22 and 27% of respondents in grades 4, 7, and 10 respond with, I don't know. And that turns out as a negative response. So that's a hard, so the question is, how many care? Well, I don't really know. It could be 4, it could be 5, it could be a dozen. In fact, all of them care about me. And so I'm not sure that is a fair way to assess it. That's a negative response. So some of it, I believe, is inherent in the question itself. It's somewhat nebulous. Do you feel you belong? Mostly I do, but some days I don't. How do you answer that? And these are the types of things that we talk about as a team, and how do we improve those numbers? Do you feel safe at school? Well, mostly I do, but today not so much, because the teacher looked at me, or the other student looked at me in a weird way. Lots goes into this, someone in grade 4. And so these are the kinds of conversations we have just about trying to determine the data on its own. I think there are some challenges with it. But then, we talk about all of our, certainly our initiatives in the last couple of years with issues around mental health on the rise and compassionate schools. We're trying to get students to a point where they feel belong and safe and welcome, and that lots of adults care about them. And we talk about this at the school level. But maybe I'm rambling a little bit. Learning Services bring me out of it, perhaps, and talk to those questions a little bit. They're good ones.
They are good questions, and oh.
I was going to say, this is the kind of conversation, it's more difficult online, but if we were in person, this is a great conversation to have with trustees and try and figure things out about why the results are the way they are. Absolutely. Sorry, Don.
No, I was just going to say the like a lot of good data results, it leads to even better questions. And I think, as Superintendent Sable mentioned, if you have 27% of students say, I don't know, the response could be, well, everybody cares about me, and that's a really positive response. Or it could be a question that leads that staff to say, well, what do we need to do so that we don't have a quarter of our students unsure how many adults care about them. And there's a definitive way that every student would be able to say, no one would answer, I don't know, because they would all say, I know exactly how many adults care about me, because the school's very purposeful in showing that they care. So it leads to really good questions. Some of the data, I don't know if you noticed that some of the data around do I feel safe at school is data that's masked, so we don't get the breakdown of how many students are on reserve or off reserve, or children and youth in care, because the ministry doesn't report out, if you have one child and you say this response is anonymous and they've been a child or youth in care and they say I don't feel safe at school, we know that we don't have that data, but we would definitely have a wonder, right? If we had a percentage of students who said they don't feel safe at school, we would ask the school to say, well, what about the children and youth in care? You won't know the percentage of those students because it's masked ministry data, but you probably have some real good wonders. And we have other ways of gathering that information from those students. You go and talk to them, right? Hey, we have our school-wide survey data back, but we have some questions that we think you might be able to help us get a bit more information on. Sorry, I think I rambled longer than the superintendent.
Well, if I could, it's because the question's good and these are the discussions we have. We know that when you're in grade 4, you feel that people care about you because you see the same person every day. In secondary school, feeling safe and welcome and belonging might be a little different because you're in this big school, you're going to 4 different classrooms every day. Different adults in the building see you. You might not feel so safe wandering in the building as you do in a single classroom in grade 4, as an example. Those are the types of things we talk about to improve those outcomes.
Okay, go ahead.
And just through the chair, if I could just add also, that is a good question. And those are the questions we ask our principals and vice principals to look at in regards to the school-based data. So take a closer look and dig in and ask the questions and have the conversations with their staff around what do the numbers show them and what are they doing at that school level and what can they do to continue to improve them. So it's the questions that we're always digging a little bit deeper on how we're going to improve.
I'm scared to ask if you have a follow-up, Trustee Stanley. Just think about how long it took to get an answer to the first part.
Yes, of course I do, but that's another time. So how about that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to stifle your conversation.
No.
If you have a follow-up, please feel free.
You didn't stifle me. Stifle.
Okay.
No, I think it's a big conversation. And while I recognize that there's challenges here in having that conversation, for example, like Scott, you brought up the whole notion of safety. Well, that's related to, an individual's attachment, not to mention their age and stuff like that. Knowing someone can care about them. Sometimes we don't have that self-concept that someone would care about us. So it's not necessarily about the schools. But I think it's really important that we ask these why questions and kind of have those conversations. And one of the things I would be curious about was that if we're having these conversations at the schools, wouldn't it be interesting if there was consistency across the schools? It would be that would be really informative about from a system perspective versus quirks of individual buildings. So thanks for that discussion.
Thanks, Trustee Stanley. Trustee Bailey.
Hi, sorry. I think actually Jackie might have just sort of answered my question. I was just going to ask, we were talking about, the data, measuring data accurately. I just wanted to know if we do, collect data from administrators in our schools that document the incidences of social emotional abuse / bullying. If we do take those and look at the numbers of complaints from parents and as well as incidences with students.
Jackie, did you want to respond to that?
Well, we have mechanisms to measure all of those things.
We do have mechanisms to be able to collect that information and have conversations with principals and vice principals, and that will be a piece that I'll be working with at the elementary level moving forward for sure.
Excellent, thanks.
Do you have a follow-up, Trustee Bailey?
No, she answered it.
Awesome. Okay, I have a question. I feel like I would be remiss in my duties as a trustee if I did not ask for someone to walk us through on page 16 of the agenda, 9 of the actual report, the grade 10 3-year trends for number and percentage of students proficient or extending in numeracy expectations as specified in the grade 10 numeracy assessment. On paper, there's an alarming number as well as alarming trends. You've alluded to it earlier on, Superintendent Saywell, about some of the design flaws, I think, with the assessment. So I'm just wondering if folks could walk us through this and talk to us about what we determine out of when we see this number, because as a trustee, it could be concerning, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, team.
Yeah, I think you're the best resource here, Don.
Yeah, I'm happy to get the conversation started. So if you go left to right, if you look at the 2019-2020 year, you look at the number of students that were included, it was 15 students. So that was a pilot year. So we had, I believe we had one class, maybe we had 2 classes in the entire district that participated in that. At the time, the message to the students was, this is a provincial-wide numeracy assessment that's coming into effect for the following year, and maybe tied to things like scholarship money and post-secondary admissions. The interest in the assessment, even as a pilot, was fairly high. When it was implemented the following 2 years, I think as Superintendent Saywell mentioned, it's a completion. It's a requirement met, which means you must complete the assessment. There was no link to local or provincial scholarship money. There's no link to post-secondary graduation. So the first challenge we have as a system is we have a requirement for students to complete the test. We want the data to be informative to the system. Ideally, we want to be able to say to our schools, this is not a math test, this is a numeracy assessment, and we want all of our teachers to be numeracy teachers. Unfortunately, when you ask students, and I can remember meeting with a school to look at the numeracy results and say, hey, you have students who received a 2 out of 4 scoring on the numeracy. They wrote it while they were in grade 11 during that first year. How did they do in their pre-calculus 11 course? And they would look up the data and they would go, they got 92% in pre-calculus 11, but a 2 out of 4 on the numeracy assessment. What's going on there? And so you follow up with a student and they'd be like, well, I was told I had to do the numeracy. I have marks that I'm aiming for in pre-calculus 11 and 12 because I want to go on to post-secondary. So there's a bit of a disconnect, and it's right now we're in that period, probably province-wide, trying to figure out how do we increase the engagement for students so that the data that comes back to the school around numeracy is something that schools can say, you know, we want to improve the results. We know that our students were putting in their best effort, and here's our results, here's our target for improvement, and here's things that, you know, a woodwork teacher contributed around numeracy skills that are in their curriculum. Here's something that happens in a science curriculum. Here's numeracy that can be shared in a physical health education class. So that's the first bit. I would say the bigger concern is not so much the trend from that pilot year where the stakes have changed, but more of a what are some ways that we can engage teachers to say what are the numeracy skills required in your curricular area, and then have them do some assessments and say, well, how do you feel about that? If you talk with a woodwork teacher around the various numeracy skills that are required in that curriculum, they get excited about students improving their numeracy skills. And I think the tool will be something that will be an indicator of actions that are taken by schools, less so than something that we would ever say as a system, with a requirement met, that we're ever going to have an exceedingly high number just by students wanting to do well on this, if that is a start for the conversation.
So I have a follow-up then, if I may. So what I'm hearing basically is, because it doesn't count for things, students aren't taking it super seriously. When someone doesn't do very well on it, we follow up with them to make sure that the student has got it, particularly when we see quite large discrepancies between how they did in the assessment and how they did on their marks. So I guess my question, is that correct that I heard? Okay. Awesome. So then my question then in the follow-up to that is, you know, and you folks hear me say this all the time, like aggregated data tells us what to celebrate, disaggregated data tells us what we need to focus on. So are we using at the district level, like what would we use to counter the narrative here? Do we have report card data? And then more importantly, how are our students in grade 10 doing on numeracy? And how are the important subsets of students, the priority students that have been identified, you know, by the ministry and important partners here, doing? And then how do we tell that story? And how do we know where to target our resources? If we don't know, how do we know? Like, how do we find out? Because it's really important to know how students are doing so we can say, okay, these particular groups of students, like you just talked about with grade 10 science, need an extra level of support in order to be able to transition through this course successfully. So what are we using, and is it possible to tell a different story than what this assessment data is telling?
You know this from.
I think in some way, and this is a great conversation, I think in many ways, when we ask students, hey, can you try your best on an assessment, right? And they say, well, what's the stakes? What's the payoff? And it's requirements met. They're not going to buy into that. It doesn't mean that we can't increase the value of numeracy and let students and parents and teachers know there is a reason why the ministry is hoping to have a more numerate and more literate graduates as they leave. And so that ties back to the teacher who's saying, hey, here's some numeracy skills that you need to be successful in science or in a metal workshop or in a PHE class or in a music class, because there's the translation of the numeracy in reading, and have the students say, oh, and then they get engaged in that because they want to become more numerate, and then they don't even need to necessarily try harder. They will naturally, the results on that numeracy assessment will creep up. Students, it's not that students don't try at all. And the other piece about that numeracy assessment is it doesn't look like a math test. Like, students are very familiar with math tests and they have very specific competencies and skills that math assesses. And the numeracy assessment is a little bit strange for them in a good way for me as an educator, because it's like, it doesn't just say, do you understand mathematics from your math class? It asks you to apply and pull different ideas from your schooling experience and demonstrate it in a numerate way. So there is a buy-in to be had by staffs to be able to say there is some numeracy in that numeracy assessment that involves science or involves measurements that I use in the curriculum that I'm in. And so it's part of it is educating our staff and providing opportunity for teachers to dig a little bit more into the numeracy and the literacy assessment at grade 10, because it too is not, it's not an English test. It is a literacy assessment. So it's an opportunity for teachers to say, where's the literacy in my curriculum? Where's the numeracy in my curriculum? And how can I help my students be better? At the end of the day, students will naturally do better on it if we do a better job of addressing those numeracy skills across the curriculum.
Superintendent Sawell, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, Dawn in another life would be an excellent politician, because that was a really great answer, and it's hard to predict how these grade 10 assessments evolve when it's a requirement met. I can't predict how they go, and if that will give us a better indication of how students are doing in grade 10 in areas of numeracy and literacy. And you know, your point's a good one, Stephanie, that we don't have a great knowledge. Schools have a better knowledge than we do district-wide. They understand these things. As a principal and vice principal, I would sit down with counselors and we'd pour over report cards, and we'd understand how students are doing in these areas quite well, and we'd apply adaptations where needed, and we would pull students in and give more support and all kinds of things at the school level. But having that information at the district level, to your point, is difficult. And right now, it doesn't really give us a lot of valuable information. Correct.
Thanks. And I guess it's, you know, I really appreciate hearing you say that, because I had those about the schools. Like, I used to have really great conversations with school principals over the the provincial exam results and how they would use
Yeah.
those. And there was actually a real hesitancy when the transition happened, recognizing from an educator perspective that it was the right move, but then a concern about how are we going to know how the kids are doing and where we need to, target things. And so, to your point about the district level, I just say it again, like when we have this information at the district level, it helps us understand those areas of where we need to target and things that we can do differently. Otherwise, we're just treating everybody equally and every school equally. And that's not, the foundation of what equity and social justice is based on. So it's important, I think, that we find a way to really make sure that these assessments are valuable for us and also for the students. I'll tell you, if students don't, what's going to happen. The universities are going to complain, and then they're going to have to be worth some kind of mark. It's going to be pass fail. It's going to be something. And that's going to be an unfortunate scenario, because nobody wants to put these pressure on these assessments to make them high stake. We want them to be a true reflection of what kids know. So thank you. Sorry, a little bit of a bad there. I don't see any other questions, and I have some more. So I'm about to start a third question list, unless other trustees have a question. Okay, I'm going to ask a question, and we'll see if anybody else pops up. It is on page 19 of the agenda, page 12 of the report, and it's on measure 3.1. And when I look at measure 3.1, something that stands out to me, and I know that it's only the 2021 year, so it's hard to make this as a firm statement, but it's interesting to me that COVID didn't have much of an impact on people there, but it's still too early to tell. I know. I saw your little wince there, Superintendent Saywell, but it's too early to tell. But what is more interesting to me is these are pretty stagnant. And I know we had this big conversation about the way people answer the questions. But if you go back even a couple more years, like these numbers are staying really stagnant. And so, what can we do about that? What can we as a board, what can, we at the district level, what can we do about these numbers, not really moving? I appreciate that there is some movement, that there's some increases between grade 4 and 7 in all of these trends. But when you look across the years, it looks, they look very similar. So what can we do to make, to see an improvement in how people feel safe and welcoming in schools?
I think one of the things, I'll give the learning services team there a little bit of time to think. I'll take a little airspace. I think one of the things that will help is the recent announcement of some monies going to districts for students in vulnerable situations, in situations of hardship, and those monies can go a long way to feeding students and buying supplies and buying even gym shoes. And I think that has an impact. And so when I think about, what trustees can do, what trustees are good at is resourcing a problem. And what would we do to get these numbers up? Because I think we've been essentially trying to get these numbers up over the last couple years with our Compassionate Schools and Compassionate Leaderships program. And yeah, to your point, they are somewhat stagnant, and it's hard because we just came through a pandemic as well. So it's hard to, I'm curious about some of the things that, we talk about, we have questions about, like why is the data showing what it's showing and that we're not moving anywhere. But it's hard. Those last couple years have been difficult for everybody. And we will keep focusing on improving mental health for staff and students. And we're doing that in a variety of ways. And maybe the team wants to share a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. This isn't a brain trust. This response is not a brain trust. I think what we focus on, what we prioritize, what we measure will improve. And I think prioritizing this notion and focusing on this notion will help us when we focus our energies. You know, for good or for bad, COVID, as difficult as it has been, and let's not forget that we're still sort of at the tail end of COVID, hopefully, that a ton of our energy has gone to just managing ourselves through that. But what it has done is it has opened the door or the window and given us some insight and has allowed us to recognize and acknowledge mental health and wellness. It really has highlighted that for us. And for good or for bad, I think that's, if we're looking at some of the, what do we used to call the COVID positives, those COVID.
Silver linings.
Silver linings. Remember that? We used that term a couple of years ago. Maybe one of the silver linings is that awareness that we hadn't had. And so I think, and to your point, Trustee Higginson, around the data, like everything you say about the data is exactly what I'm thinking in my head and feeling in my body. I'm feeling and thinking the same things, is to systematize our approach. I'm not saying that every school does the same thing. I think we need to allow schools to contextualize their approach to human and social development in this regard, with regards to this data, for sure. But I think the expectation or the collaboration and the support to have schools pull that data so we can look at it district-wide and we can look at trends and we can look at what's working, what's not, and what's next, I think is really, really important. And I think our focus on continuing to focus on truth and reconciliation, that has a major impact on, certainly how Indigenous children and families feel and operate, but I think it's how everyone also feels and operates. Again, that wasn't a brain trust response. It's just what we focus and what we measure tends to grow.
Thank you. I agree with you. What we focus on and measure tends to grow, and that's partly why having reliable data that allows us to know where to focus. That's what disaggregated data does, right? It tells us where we need to focus. And it's really hard to do that without it, to focus without it. You just are kind of spraying the seeds everywhere, right? So, okay, I see Trustee Stanley has popped up with another question.
I'm here, it's just the camera slow again. So I will just talk and show up eventually. So here's a doom and gloom one. Ready? In this conversation, which is another really great conversation that I would love to talk about, like on a whole real retreat where we explore issues, not just a meeting that's a whole day long. The research that's coming out of schools from a suicide perspective during COVID, or it's not coming out of schools, it's coming out of hospitals and mental health, is seeing that children's rates of suicide and suicide ideology has gone down during COVID, particularly when they were not in schools. And so I throw this out there to consider in this conversation. And yeah, I said it's doom and gloom, but I think it's really important for us to just kind of be really honest. As much as, we may love schools, and as much as we find them fabulous places, and as much as many people do, schools are a unique stressor for kids, and it's not a positive experience for all kids. And so I think we always need to kind of remind ourselves of that, the flip side, or, that it can be a negative experience for people. In the spirit of what was just said, which is that, I can't remember what your quote was, Laura, it was great, just about focusing on data and how it changes and grows. I'm wondering if there is a way that we could look or compare, cross-reference this data that's looking at, do they feel safe in schools? Do they feel welcome? All those things with incident reports. And I mean, I don't know if that's, is it desegregated? Can we look at the schools? Anyways, just, obviously we don't have that data here at this moment, but I do think, back to my kind of other question about why, I think it's really important and to kind of consider that, and then maybe we can look at why it's stagnant. But I guess we got to look at the positive and the negative side. So I'm wondering, is that even possible to, fundamentally compare two different data, groups of data?
We don't have an easy way to, as you know, and you've said, I'll agree with you, we don't have an easy way to access those data combinations. However, it is a major significant priority for us in Learning Services and the senior team to look at data. We've seen conversation to look at data and then to investigate more deeply how we'd like to cross-reference and what kind of queries we'd like to put into a data dashboard, like the very unique question that you have, right? So could we look at some of this learning survey data and cross-reference that with incident reports? We can do whatever we want if we have a good system that will allow us to do that over time. The urgency is there. Like, I'm hearing you, I'm feeling you. The urgency is absolutely there. A vast majority of this conversation this evening has been hinging on data and being able to access data at the district level, and we feel it and we have the same need that you have.
Thanks. No follow-up.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions, so I'll just add my final question. I actually had 21 questions tonight. I know, I'm just gonna cut everyone some slack, but I think, well, first I'll ask my question and then I'll say my comment after. So here's my final question. What does this tell us about our district? I'll start with you, Superintendent.
Yeah,
What does
thanks.
this information tell us about our district?
Yeah. I think it tells us we have, we're moving in a good direction. I think it tells us that there are lots of areas we need to focus on. Indigenous students on reserve, as an example. And so we have a program, a satellite program starting soon. I think, you know, at our opening meeting with principals and vice principals, I posed the question, you know, and it looks like over the last 4 years with this board that, you know, at least the large measure of success has increased year over year. I don't think you could have written it 4 years ago any better. I've shared in the past that, you know, we were second to last on the island in completion rates in every category, and now we're second on the island and just a smidge below provincial rates, and we were 10% more 4 years ago, and we've closed that gap. Some of it, you know, as you and I have talked, Stephanie, is through the use of the adult dogwood, but not all of it. And when I posed that question to principals, the response was, because it's, what do you pinpoint in that? What does an elementary principal say? What does a kindergarten teacher say? How do you attribute success in grad rates? Well, I think what is overwhelmingly obvious, and what the response was from principals and vice principals, was that there's a really great culture here. People like working here. They like being here, generally speaking. And I think there's a certain degree of pride in our district again. And that feels pretty good. I hope trustees feel that. What this report exhibits, I believe, is that kind of pride we have in the district. We have lots to work on. But this is a pretty good place to learn. It's a pretty good place to teach, and it's a pretty good place to work with kids. So that's what this report says to me.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Well
I don't know if
said.
anybody
Who
else.
wants to? Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna jump on because it was well said.
Well, it was just, yeah, well said. Well, absolutely well said. I think it's obvious that the data doesn't necessarily reflect the information that we need to make informed decisions, but I would also say that the data doesn't capture the beauty of this district. The data doesn't capture the celebrations as well. So not only is it not giving us accurate information about where our gaps are, it's not giving us accurate information that reflects the bone-tired, beautiful, hard work of the educators in those schools, the teachers, our support staff, those school leaders, our custodians, the arborists. It's not capturing those and that celebration in an accurate manner as either.
Thank you. Okay, I think, you know, my one final comment on the framework and the framework report is, you know, there's been some comments tonight about how it's hard to do this in person, and we wish there was a retreat where we could just dig into this. And I think, to be honest, the you know, it talks in your handout or your write-up, Superintendent, about how the purpose of the report is to provide the ministry with an update. But I think the purpose of the report is actually to make sure that we're having these conversations throughout the year together, that we are ensuring that we know where to target our resources, and that we put it together in a report at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year to say, this is what we know about our students and this is what we're doing to address those gaps. And so I think it, you know, having us focus on this all year long, or having us, you know, to Trustee Stanley point, sit together and really dig into this. So as trustees, we know where our gaps are. We know where, when we're getting pulled in a million different directions at budget time, it's not the loudest voice that wins. It's you know, a data-driven, informed decision about where we're going to target the limited resources we have. So I think that you know, this is the start of a really great conversation, and I hope that we continue to you know, we're able to continue having them to understand the data and you know, the lack of data, and what we can do as board to support you in being able to have access to the data that you need. We have policies on our books that say we will not utilize very valuable student information at the district level. There are things we can do as well that warrant very good conversation amongst trustees to determine. So I think these are the beginning of really good conversations, and I hope that they're good cycles of conversations as we continue. And so no more questions on that. I appreciate all the work that has gone into the report. Deputy Superintendent Tate, to your point about numbers not being able to show the heart, I think that's where our wonderful communications department comes in with multimedia presentations and links that show people talking about, you know, all those things that you, Superintendent Saywell, said as well about the heart of the district, and that's the engine that drives it. So I appreciate that commentary as well on the importance of it. And on that, we'll wrap up our framework conversation, unless there's anything else that you wanted to add, Superintendent Saywell?
No, thank you, Stephanie.
Okay, then we move on to 8.3. We got all the way to 7:33 without having to have an in-depth conversation on communicable disease guidelines, but it's important that we provide an update to the community so that they can, and you know, our entire school community, so people can understand how we're working hard to keep kids safe, just, you know, at this point in the pandemic.
Absolutely, thank you. So on what do we got? Page 28 of 29 in your agenda, you'll see the link to the provincial communicable disease guidelines for K-12 settings, and so we've updated that locally at NLPS. It is on our website. We are starting the year the same way we ended, and that is that there is no longer a mask mandate. The direction from the Ministry of Education, CDC, BC, our provincial health officer, and our local medical health officer is that stay home when you're sick. Take measures to wash your hands often, sneeze into your elbow, and follow all of those good hygiene habits. As we move into well, maybe I'll pause. I hope the trustees had a chance to click on the link and read the guidelines. Again, the same way we finished last year. Maybe I'll pause.
Does anybody have any questions about the updated guidelines? I'm not seeing any.
I was going to maybe just call Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh to just maybe talk about air filtration, because I know it's been a big issue in the past, and could just share sort of updated information. Thanks, Mark. Nice to see you.
Through the chair, thank you, Scott. So yeah, this is good news story for our school district, and it's more than just about COVID, but I think it's about the general health and well-being of our students and our staff. Is that we are continuing, just a reminder, I think, that we are one of the fortunate districts that has been working on mechanical ventilation for a number of years, multiple decades, in fact. And so this year, with the opening of Solaire, which included a upgraded mechanical ventilation system, we're down to one facility in need of a ventilation upgrade. That is Ladysmith Intermediate. There's a couple of pockets at Ladysmith Secondary that we're also fixing, but the majority of the school is in good shape. But LIS is, we've got, the work is about to commence with respect to getting a kind of temporary but effective mechanical ventilation solution at that school to cover all of our schools. We're going to continue to have enhanced airflow and continue to have MERV 13 ventilation. The board will see a few costs associated with that are going to come next week to hopefully be supported through the surplus. Of course, increased air flow means we're heating more air in the winter because we're bringing in outside air, which costs either electric and unfortunately is going to have a carbon impact as well. And just the filtration, of course, is got to push harder to get the air through the filters. And then we will also be coming with continued heightened protocols with respect to custodial to meet the requirements or the guidance. But one of the things that we really are going to focus on, and we've talked about as a team, is that I think we are under the risk, or we hearing that, you know, flu has been gone for a long time and it may well come back. And so we're going to be keeping our eye out on that. And so we've got all the spray equipment still. We're not going to be doing nightly spraying in our schools because we understand that's not necessarily going to have a COVID impact, but we're going to be ready to react to schools with high absenteeism or reported flu outbreaks, etc. So, essentially, we're the things that we're continuing on doing at the operational level, we think that are going to have a positive health and safety impact on communicable diseases more generally.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll just finish off by saying that although masks aren't required, we support and encourage the wearing of masks. In a conversation with our local medical health officer recently, she described what would probably be an increase in other bugs around this fall, like flu. So get your booster, your COVID booster, as well as your flu shot. Thank you.
So you're not off the hook yet. There are two questions. One from Trustee Stanley and the second from Trustee Bailey.
Hi again. So this is a hot topic in the community, and I'm just wondering, one of the questions that I've seen kind of bantered about, so I always think it's really important to get accurate information out there, or more information. Mark, sorry, this might not be within your area of expertise, so I'm going to ask, and we'll respect that maybe we need someone else here, but I am wondering if we have our filtration systems, and then we also talk about opening windows and doors. Does that opening windows and doors negatively affect or impact at all our filtration systems?
So through you, Chair, so that our health and safety group, and I can get more information, but my understanding is that it's actually our preference that when we are using mechanical ventilation, that we are not utilizing open windows to doubly enhance airflow. Somewhat similar to, we've had requests to kind of bring in individual units, filtrations into schools, and we're not interested in that because of the interference in the systems that we have. And so I would say we're not policing that in a heavy way, but we certainly can get a little bit more information on that from health and safety. But that was what we were encouraging last year. We have mechanical ventilation. You know, if we can avoid the open windows, of course, heat. We do have some air conditioning in some of our schools, but the vast majority do not. So there's a bit of reality that kicks in to get some colder air, but we're not suggesting to open that. And I can't speak to the impact of open doors.
Trustee Bailey?
Can I have a follow-up on that, actually?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Follow up.
Sorry, I just want to say it would be great if we could get some information out there around those questions to the public. Maybe we already have a Q&A. It would just be great to be able to spread that information easily. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Bailey.
Hi, just 1 second. This actually is a question from Trustee Keller because he can't get in. For some reason, he's having technical difficulties and he's only being let into the live event. He can't participate. So he says he'd like to ask what we're doing to encourage and destigmatize masks. And I think that it was mentioned that from, I think Mr. Saywell, did you like that, Scott? I called you Mr. Saywell. I think Mr. Saywell, Superintendent Saywell, had mentioned that they were going to encourage it. And I'm just wondering, like, how are we going to do that? Are we sending notices out to the families? Are we talking to kids in the classroom? Like, can you elaborate?
Thank you, Naomi. You're the first person to recognize me this evening, Mr. Saywell. We hopefully, you know, we are at every level not stigmatizing the wearing of masks, but supporting it. I mean, that's been the direction from my office. And well, you know, I wasn't planning to send out another letter. We did our welcome back letter from the chair and myself already. We could consider that to make sure that people understand that we fully support, of course, people who are wearing masks. And you see it in the community, lots are. And lots are, you know, people in vulnerable circumstances who are immunocompromised. So completely respect the wearing of masks. And I can share that more widely. We can talk about that a little bit more as a staff, whether that's required. I think it's understood around the district that we support students and staff wearing masks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, and I think it was mentioned actually as a parent in the letter that came home today that we encourage. And you know, from the chair, that we encourage it and we support students and we'll work hard to support them in the classroom. And I think that this also just, you know, having spent a number of hours of my life focused on these things, I think it's important for us to kind of step back from the very, you know, pandemic type view and remember that creating safe and caring learning environments for all students, if they want to wear their clothes inside out and upside down, which is, you know, not exactly the same thing, but like we do these things. We respond to student trauma, not just COVID related, but student like trauma that they may be having in their life. These are things we do every day. And so my hope is that we're doing them well enough that we don't have to single out doing it around masks. But I do also recognize the importance of it in this current context that we're in, that there might need to be a little bit of a focus on it. So I see from Karen that we have no questions online. We have no correspondence referred from the regular board meeting. And my only comment in closing is that, you know, we will be approving this. Well, there'll be a motion to approve this report at the final meeting. So hopefully those, like, we'll get all our little typos in line.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to approve it at the final meeting because it's a tight turnaround if we don't. So I look forward to the final FESA report at the board meeting at the end of the month for approval. And I really want to thank our staff for, you know, this is a really hard format for us to have conversations about data and student success and dig into them. So I appreciate the efforts that were made today to try to respond to our questions, and to the trustees who dug in and asked some really interesting questions. So thanks to everyone. And I believe that I just need a motion to adjourn. Trustee Bailey's helping me. That's a motion by Trustee Bailey, seconded by Trustee Stanley. And I don't see any objection to adjourning. So we are adjourned at our first Education Committee meeting of the night at 7:46, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks, everybody.